AM and PM for the audience, real quick.
Ooh,
Time is an
you know,
infinite circle.
jet lag is a hell of a drug. Yeah.
It doesn't matter now. Like, really, it's anytime you set an alarm and you make it for PM, it should have like triple opt-in. Like, are you sure? Are you 100% sure
though? Yeah.
you wanted it to be for PM? And you're like, yeah, okay, I did. Because
yeah.
Most of the time you don't. Most of the time it's like, no, probably not.
Yeah. It was set from having to go pick up my kid from D&D the other night. So
D&D.
Wow. Yeah, we got a player.
You rolled a what do they call it? A massive failure, a 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that like okay.
That's no, in setting the alarm clock in the wrong.
I thought there was
Matt
some sort
Ray.
of
You don't know
implication about my child.
Had an awkward kind of feeling to it. I agree with you, man. I was like, I'm not sure.
Ask your son on a D20 dice what happens if you roll a 1. Or
I understand that. I thought
okay.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
Matt rolled a 1 on setting the alarm. The phone caught on fire.
Yes. Exactly. Phone caught on fire. House burns down. You take D8 points of damage.
All right. Well, I think there's plenty to talk about this week. So you want to we can, if you guys are ready, we'll just get rolling. Kote, you ready?
Yeah, I'm just tweeting that we're recording.
It's fantastic.
What was I going to talk about? Oh, who knows? All right. Well, I was realizing recently that I haven't been using the old ChatGPT as much as I used to be. And I was thinking, is something wrong with me? Or have I just... Have I just reached the other side of the hill of excitement? You know, I think it might be the second. I've just sort of maxed out the wonderment of it. Like, I was trying to put together have it help me write some stuff, and I was realizing it would just be faster if I wrote it myself rather than having it do something for me. And it no longer, my favorite use case was to have it go fetch a web page and summarize it. It stopped doing that a long time ago. They even turned off I love this explanation. This is like so like, whatever internet. I heard they were doing some content with Bing and a plugin to fetch web pages, but they turned it off recently because it might give you the full contents of a web page that was behind a paywall. And it's like, isn't that what we're doing here? That's the internet, right?
Is that what I want? Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I gonna have to go back to Google and just paste URLs into the Google search bar till one just pops up
I think of all types of organizations, the AI ones that are basically taking and remixing content and making profit off of it, they should be like, yeah, I mean, this is cool, right? No problem, but whatever. So like, I think maybe if they went back to be only with fetch web pages, I would be all into it.
They want a cupcake.
Hi, Bianca.
At one table.
I'd like a cupcake.
What the heck was that?
Sorry, no, I just was sitting. I hit this other website. My bad. My apologies. I was trying to get on the Twitch stream. Flooded that out.
Yeah,
taking over.
I know. It's like, how do I get on this thing? Don't do that. And then I did it.
I'm like furiously looking through my tabs, wondering what the heck I'd done.
No, it's on me. I was just like, I needed to like turn. Don't autoplay. It didn't autoplay. Anyway, all right.
That was fantastic. Let me try to pick back up here.
No. Collect yourself. That was my fault. Collect yourself.
So I think maybe if it still retrieved web pages, which was the initial use case that was so fantastic, you could just build up a log of like summarize these things for me. Oh, it was great, but it doesn't do that any longer. And I even tried to set up some sort of iOS shortcut where like you get the article version of the web page you're looking at and you copy it to the clipboard. And I think on iOS there's a shortcut thing where you could send it to the ChatGPT app to do it. But it just seems like a lot of work.
Wait, quick check-in though. You're still cannot use Google Bard, right? You're still.
Yeah, I haven't actually checked
from that. I guess
I could use it when I was at DevOps UK in London because I guess they can use it. But since we're very protected here on the continent with our privacy and rights and whatnot, we don't get any of
that version is a little bit more free with getting to the different web pages. Although I will agree with you, like I don't know, maybe it is sort of like you just quickly adapt. It's like there's the initial, this is great, and then use it a ton. And then I was like, I would agree. I've used it a little less, but I still it's just like another tool though. Now it's like anytime I want to like either summarize things, and I also use it to like, I don't know if you will, like edit. I think it's maybe better at editing than like, creation, like just like edit this,
I can see that. That's true. That's true. I mean, so I was thinking all this because I was using it yesterday and today for something, and it still is really great for like, I was doing some research on like, digital transformation in banking, which is just like, you can imagine how exciting that is to read. And so, I would go to all the McKinsey and the Bains and Deloitte's and the Ernst and Young's and just kind of like cut and paste their thing and be like, summarize this for me just to see if there was anything interesting to read in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. But I think it's yet another one of these situations where, not yet another, but like everything is easier on a desktop or a laptop than on your phone. And once you're on the phone or the iPad, like it gets to be annoying. Whereas like, just cutting and pasting between two windows is actually fine. I don't think I would even notice something, but it, that's not where I guess, it's not oddly enough, but that's not really where I prefer to do most of my reading and consuming stuff on a laptop. Seems awkward, but the other thing that I really need is like, I keep wanting to like, put 2 like transcripts for hour-long podcasts in there, but that's just too much information. So maybe one day when I can do that. I was even thinking, what I should do is I can load up these podcasts into script, which will make a transcript. And then if I can just chunk it into batches, then I can feed that in there. And then I can ask it to summarize and help me write articles based on that. And then I thought like, or I could not do that.
Well, it's almost like a if this then that kind of play thing list where you can be like, here's a workflow, and I'm gonna string a bunch of AIs together to, or a bunch of MLs together to solve my problems. Just a matter of time before they kill that flow. But yeah.
I do think the whole thing will be a lot better when like I think everyone's implementing the Copilot, AI for every application. So like, whether it's Overcast or some other podcast player, like imagine just having a little button. You just like on the episode, you just say, summarize this in one paragraph. Like then you would use it. Or the same thing, like if it's in Word or in your email system, it's like respond with this, right?
We were using Chorus, which somebody bought, I think Zoom maybe, and it for our Zoom calls, and it was providing summaries, and they weren't very good. And then we've switched to Gong for the same functionality for transcripts, and I haven't looked for it, but I haven't seen like an AI interface to it yet. But the transcripts are cool, so yeah.
But I do think the whole thing, it's a broader question. Is always like, there's so much a conversation about like safety and is it going to like end humanity, and it's like, when you use it, you feel like, no, I don't feel that way at all. Like, I don't even think this thing's like even close to ending. I mean, it's not to say something could happen, but it's just like the disparity between like what people want to talk about, like this is the end of the world, versus like actually doing stuff just seems as huge as possible. Like I always come back to that IRS use case. It's like, okay, like has it figured out how to do all the back tax, process all whatever 50 million back tax returns and like spit it out and email everyone? Like it seems like that's an $80 billion problem. Like
I'm looking at the IRS AI overmind with its human workers that just feed right,
but it's just taxes. It's just like one of the things, like when's it going to be able to do that? I don't think anyone at the IRS is like, oh, we're done. We don't let's get back to $80 billion. It's like, but meanwhile, everyone's like, humanity's going to be threatened and we're all going to die. And it's like, well, I guess we're all going to die with a lot of unprocessed tax returns. That seems to be what's going to happen.
I think and then I have 2 more thoughts there that I've been thinking of. One is in an unrelated thing, I was realizing I should try to read actual 3-dimensional books. Because I haven't found any books that I'm interested in reading, and I've got not all, but I think there's something different about reading a book like that to see if it fixes my brain. And what you discover if you haven't read 3-dimensional books in a while is you can't tap on it and like look something up and like see what it is.
You keep your phone next to you, and then you end up getting distracted by your phone.
Exactly. And this one, I forget what listener in what year recommended it, but it's called Against Purity. And it had a good promise. I don't really know where it's going in the first 2 chapters, but that's fine. But here's a good workflow. Like, it's very academic. Well, I don't know if it's very academic, but it's more academic than like, Reddit or whatever. And so like you'll be reading something and it's using all these fancy academic words. But nowadays you can use a tool chain where you point your iPhone at it and select the text and copy that text and then go over to the ChatGPT app and be like, explain this to me. And that's actually really nice, right? And the point there being that, you know, and I guess this does sound arrogant, but like, I feel like if you're an expert at something, it's not very helpful, right? Like I spent a lot of time initially having it summarize articles that I wrote and being kind of like, that's actually not what's going on there. Right. And because, and
well, that's what I worry about when you hand it something to summarize, it's going to lose track of like the subtleties of you're making. It's like, this looks
totally,
like, you know, 100 other articles on the subject that I've written.
And then, you know, for example, if you go to the news stack and you're like, there is something in this article that's interesting, but I don't want to take the time to read it. And you ask it to summarize it. It's not interesting.
Don't ask it to summarize it. Tell it to show you the novel ideas.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah. So there's that. But then the other thing I was thinking is like, I was reading. I think he's a professor, and he's ongoing been writing about like actually using, you know, AI stuff in the classroom, like assigning his students to do it rather than being fearful of it. And he was having some. He called it the oncoming AI apocalypse in the fall, or I don't think he used words like that, but he had a good point that like, all right, school's out for summer, la la la. And when people come back, this is going to be a real thing that everyone is going to have to deal with in school. And he went on to talk, and I was thinking like, oh yeah, I should figure out. Kim and I did the calculations. I think our kids have 6 weeks off for summer, which is crazy. Yeah. But like, we should come up with like a curriculum of like, here's how. Let's learn how to use AI for school in a good way. But I don't really know.
But
how much time I have to spend on that.
Are going to be kept out of the loop.
That's right.
Oh yeah. There actually was. I think this is coming up in next fall. But there's in the Netherlands. I think this is final. I don't remember reading the article that closely. I hadn't had too much coffee. But I think there's like a ban on cell phones and also watches, any digital device in the classroom for students. Because as you know, the calculator and the abacus destroyed society. Once you write a tool that helps you do something and really what happened with the calculator is once people figured out you could turn it upside down and spell boobs, civilization ended. Man, like it was a big distraction.
They got the intellectual and the moral uproar there.
Well, I will say though, one thing I do still love about ChatGPT, and maybe it's just my level of the programming I'm doing, is like it is phenomenal at like, you know, write a method. If you're trying to do a little programming, like a little Python project, a little like
that's true.
I think it's like, because what's great about it is like you can then take the code and then either compile it or run it, and you kind of see what happens, right? And then you either see the error and you can have it fix it, or you kind of learn. You're like, oh, it did this wrong, and then you learn it. You're like, oh, and that whole
what do you use
overflow? You don't have to go to Stack Overflow. That whole little cycle of like write the stub for me, or like write the logic, do it wrong, let me learn something or change something, or like change the requirement, rewrite it. That flow is awesome. I love it. I think I don't think there's any way to program ever again.
This reminds me of my final fear around this is like, you remember back in school, maybe this never happened to you too, but like there were lots of clever teachers and well, there were some. And you would say like, this is boring. And they would say, this is not boring, you're boring, right? Like, you know, like that kind of attitude. And maybe the problem is that ChatGPT is actually pretty awesome and not boring. It's just, I've become boring. I haven't come up with, if I can't come up with a way to be excited about it, I'm not working on enough content. I need it to be get some data and have it output some SVGs that I can paste into PowerPoint for a cool chart or something like that. So we'll see. But I think if any listener, anyone knows like an interesting curriculum for a 13 and a 9-year-old, I think the 3.5-year-old's too young, but it would be fun to like, you know, be like, here's a way that you can use ChatGPT to help you out with your school stuff that isn't cheating. That would be fun to look over. Well, speaking of nothing related to that, I'm not really sure what a segue would be.
Speaking of cheaters.
You know, what would have been a great use of ChatGPT if it could ingest things would have been to collect the last 2 weeks, including the novel that I wrote trying to figure this stuff out. Like what the deal with the Red Hat Enterprise Linux relicensing hoopla is. Lots of articles were written, and I think if you could have added a corpus of like lots of information and you could have asked it questions like, what are people freaking out about? It would have been fascinating to see what it came back with. And I'm not going to waste our time by verifying my understanding.
You don't want to recap the 70 post chat that we had?
Yeah, Matt Ray and I had almost 100 messages back and forth that weren't just smiles and thumbs trying to sort through this. And I think
smiles and thumbs.
I think we can come at it from a more like, I think there's like a million articles to summarize it. And I think the short answer is that like, we all get it. RHEL source code is not going to be easily available to
people. That's all you got to know.
And if you will, repackaging. I'm trying to choose my words that are not loaded because there's a lot of stuff in there. But I think the more meta conversation is this, like, I just think it is around, I guess, this idea of just sort of like, it's sort of like renegotiating the value chain of what's going on. I think that's just kind of what's happened here. It's sort of like at a highest level, I just think it sort of comes down to like, what is Red Hat's business? Red Hat's business is about selling support and long-term support to customers that want to run certain versions of Linux. So what do? Is they essentially, take the patches, if you will, integrate them into the downstream. And then since for a long time, they have always made all of that source code available, which it still will be, but they've made it, if you will, very easy to repackage for most of the history of Red Hat, right? And so the change here now is, I think, if you just say it more succinctly, is that Red Hat has now said, it's like, hey, the value we're providing is very high, and we're not capturing enough value. We're not capturing enough profit around that or value, right? And they're saying, so they're sort of changing the term, saying that, like, listen, we're doing all of this work and we believe we should capture more of the value. And therefore, we're going to make it harder for you to repackage RHEL, right? Going forward. Yep. And not surprisingly, because it's back to the defaults lifestyle, right? Not surprisingly, when you change the defaults or change the equation, a whole nother group of people, in this case, the community, are not going to be happy about it. Now, and I think that's sort of like where we're left. It was sort of like, okay, like they're very unhappy about it. And I think it comes across as it's being done like kind of like unilaterally, right? I think that's the other aspect, right? It's just sort of like that change gets made and it really upsets people, but it seems very predictable on both sides, right? That like, if you make this change, people are going to be really upset. So I don't know, Matt, looks like I can just see, Matt, you've got things to say. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, yes, I since Cote and I had our thread of explanation where we kind of went back and forth and explained, who's getting left out and how feathers are being ruffled. I've been reading some of Red Hat's own documentation about CentOS Stream, and they're really dismissive of their own product. It's weird. When you use words like undifferentiated security patches, it doesn't leave the warm feeling like this is something you would ever want to use. So they're even with the product that they're like, oh, this is the replacement for what you used to do. You're our testing grounds. They're like, that testing grounds, it's not safe. Anything could happen there. We could break it at any second. Why would you ever use that? By RHEL. And it's like, you're not leaving that community of users and testers who are like, I need a RHEL image to do my work, and I don't want to go through your hoops. I'll just use CentOS and know it's okay. They don't leave us feeling good about this at all. But maybe that's Red Hat's intention, is they don't want anyone to feel good except for themselves.
I don't know, this is where I think we should get into like what, because I think there's a bunch of talk in the Software Defined Talk Slack, which anyone can join. Go to softwaredefinedtalk.com. And I don't know, there's like different like theories about the motivation. Like, what is the motive? Like one theory was like, well, they were bought by IBM and the IBM overlords said, you have to make more money and you have to make this change. Like, I really don't believe that. I'm like, I don't know, having spent some time at IBM and others, like, I don't think the IBM executives are engaged at this level. Sure, I'm sure they told Red Hat, like, we would like you to make this amount of money. But beyond that, I think it's inside Red Hat is deciding to do this. But like, ultimately, there has to be some motivation. Is the motivation that they believe that, I don't know, do you believe that the motivation was driven by them believing that this will drive more revenue? Is that their motivation?
Well, I don't know enough about the revenue on the table, so to speak. Like I didn't go look up market shares and stuff like that. But like, yeah, I mean, I'm not to avoid answering your question, but I think there's almost I don't know, maybe someone retired or something, but there's almost like, I think maybe we're in this like the into free era where like all this free stuff we're used to, like people just aren't up with that nonsense anymore. And I think I say it that way because maybe the position is like, I don't know, in moves like this, it's either you do something like this either because you want to make more money, right? And even that phrase, you want to make more money, is too pejorative. It's like you want to run a business is like why you do it. Mm-hmm. Or there's usually like some sort of irrational emotional grudge going on, right? Like, like all of a sudden you're going to end up with, a cage match with someone, like some stupid shit like that, right? And so like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's weird emotional grudge stuff going on. Like some of the writing is like, we don't think people are contributing. And, our friend of the podcast, Adam Jacobs, had a good rephrasing of it that was just like, we want people to contribute. I'm bastardizing, as they say, his summary there. But like, I kind of think, I don't know Red Hat people at all, but I almost feel like they wouldn't care, right? Like, like they haven't cared all these decades, right? Or all these years. And, I don't know IBM well enough, but what you and whoever else was saying, like, I think the IBM people probably also don't care as far as emotional grudge wise. And so like, it kind of goes back to like, yeah, we got a business to run here and like more money would be cool. And so like,
to that point out, so Mike McGrath, I think we should just take like Mike McGrath is the person that like wrote the blog post, right? And
so they're not going to take it at face value. That would be crazy.
I think we can just say, and I think there is a twinge of emotion in his second blog post. I'm just going to read it. So one thing that's in bold. This is not my emphasis added for once. I'm just going to read it, but this is literally something in bold. He says, quote, "Simply rebuilding code without adding value or changing it in any way represents a real threat to open source companies everywhere. This is a real threat to open source and one that has the potential to revert open source back into a hobbyist and hackers only activity," end quote. And I'm like, that feels like it has that's doing a lot of work, right? I was like, I don't really feel like this is a threat to open source. Like,
and so this does bring up something I've only like idly thought about, unlike all my other serious, strenuous thinking, where there was even maybe only Matt Assay like referenced this, but like the obvious comparison is like AWS and Mongo and Elasticsearch and all that, where like the tables here are kind of reversed in those situations where it's like, instead of it being big, as people like to say, purple hat, haha, that's great colors. But like, instead of it being big old IBM and Red Hat, doing the thing now, you got the Mongos and the little people who are being like, not preyed on, or whatever.
A little old Oracle.
Right. And so while everyone is like, that's kind of weird to introduce this new type of licensing and whatever, it's sort of understandable that they, to the point of what you're saying, that if these smaller open source companies, if someone like AWS can just come in and clone their stuff, they can pretty easily gobble up their market. And you're kind of left thinking like, ooh, wasn't what's supposed to happen in the open source world, right? So there is a comparison kind of like, like even though they're the big one, like you could, I can see a case where like, you're just like, this isn't cool. And so we're going to stop doing it. Now, I think what I had in my mind when I was going over the little joke about did someone retire is like, but that's like always been like, what's changed since whenever. And so there's some event that was like, all right, let's do it. Right. Like, let's actually do it this time.
They must have lost something to Oracle.
I was going to say one more quote, and I think this is real short, but it says, in that same post, this quote, "Ultimately, we do not find value in a RHEL rebuild, and we are not under any obligation to make things easier for rebuilders. This is our call to make," end quote. And it's like, that part I think is factually correct. I'm like, no, I shouldn't say that. I'm going to say, I'm not saying it's factually correct. I'm saying like they are free to make that decision. I guess there'll be some maybe legal wrangling about like the open source, like licensing. I don't know. I'll have to leave that part to the lawyers, but I think this part is like, and I think if they just left it at that, it's like, I don't know. To me, it's sort of like the only reason to do this is to your point, Cote, is that you as RHEL and Red Hat feels like this advances their business in some way, right? Because otherwise, like why take all of the PR hit? Why take, just all of the frustration to do it? So I understand that they want to do it, but I think then, like I already read that quote, is like, to say it's a threat to open source and all this other stuff, I think for a real stretch. Like that's where you're getting way too far out on your limbs. And it's like, because ultimately the community here will decide, because it sounds like there's been a lot of posts and like, lots of stuff that we probably won't go into. Like it looks like there will be some way for I don't know what the right word is, the rebuilders. So that's
the rebuilders. Sure.
Not, I don't want to I think it's fine. I think we all know what they're doing, but there'll be some way that they will recreate it. It looks like they'll have to work out exactly how, but there's lots of people figuring that out. And so at the end of this, I think we're just going to get like, yes, you made it harder for the rebuilders,
but they still did it.
Yes, it will still exist. So did anyone win anything? And then the kind of the business question would be like, were any of the people that ultimately going to use the other distributions, the rebuilt distributions, were they going to buy, RHEL anyway? I always feel like probably not in a significant business way to impact your business, but so it just becomes one of those things like you did all of this, but I'm not sure you're going to get what
I think this is one of those deals where they thought they were going to get a better outcome. And from what I've read, so Rocky Linux pointed out that if they use RHEL in the cloud, they get source. So all they have to do is go to, AWS, spin up a RHEL instance, download the source, and they're free. That should be covered under the license. That seems to be like, Red Hat doesn't really have unless Red Hat wants to kill their cloud business, they're probably that loophole is there, right? And they're using they have the image so that they are a customer of Red Hat, so they're allowed to download the source. That loophole seems pretty cut and dry to me. And so at the end of this, you end up with like, oh, everyone figured out the new workflow. You had a 2-week hiccup of Alma and Oracle and others having to deal with this, and you just burned everyone who thought like, oh, whatever you were doing with CentOS, we're over that. But now you have people like Jeff Geerling who are like, I'm done. I'm not testing my code on RHEL anymore. I'm not. You have lots of people who are like, I'm not going to go out of my way to accommodate Red Hat anymore if they're going to do this. And I think, in exchange for bad will, they got nothing.
Right. And I think what you're getting at here is, I think ultimately the community response, right, is going to be the collective thing. And I think, your Cote, you alluded to before, we were kind of like Reddit went through something similar, and it's sort of like, you just never know what you spawn. I think in this case, if you're at Red Hat, is sort of like, you just believe the status quo will prevail. It's like, this will flare up, there'll be some noise about it and it will go away. That's definitely possible. As we always talk about here, the default lifestyle, is very powerful. Now, having said that, because I can't help, and this is like kind of being a little bit older, I guess, it's like to think back of like Solaris and Sun, right? At the time, it's like very dismissive, kind of different situation, but very dismissive of Linux in general. It was sort of like a toy, a hobbyist thing. It's not for real applications and things like that. But over time, that community, right? I mean, even going back to like when I first saw Red Hat was like a book in a bookstore with a big DVD CD in the back, right? It was just like, it's just such a different world, even thinking about it now. But you just never know when the seeds of, something new are planted. And so out of this, maybe there is some kind of like enterprise Linux, foundation or collective that people are like, no, like we're going to take this forward. We're going to find some way to have some standard, and we're going to have some way of like identifying which patches are backported, and these other distributions will begin to pick it up. So you just never know if like that gets kicked off, and sort of like all of this, right? This was the moment where it all happened. Whereas like, when, Scott McNeely and they didn't want to like release Solaris x86 and was open source for like a week, and then it wasn't. And then people were like, at the time, the Sun people, I mean, I worked there, I guess, to some degree, would say like, well, Solaris is like so much better than Linux. Like you would never trust anything to Linux. But it's like, time showed that like, I don't know, Linux got pretty good. So, time can show I don't know if it's Rocky Linux or any of the things you were just mentioning, Matt. It's like, the community can decide like, we don't need you anymore. Like, and it can move on pretty fast in a way that like really is surprising. So I don't know, like that's not going to affect next quarter's revenue. That's not going to affect next year's revenue, but like, I don't know, 5 years from now, it'll be interesting to see where RHEL is at relative to the overall marketplace of Linux.
I think Red Hat has the distinct advantage that like SUSE and Canonical have never really been able to capitalize on any of this, or at least it feels that way. Like they don't really. I mean, Canonical, clearly won the cloud market with their whole, offering Ubuntu images at no cost, or no like surcharge. Whereas Red Hat was always like the same price as Windows instances, so it was always a lot more, and thus Canonical won a lot of the cloud workloads. But like I haven't really seen enterprise traction. I haven't seen anybody except Oracle.
You're kind of
really
getting the status quo. Like I think you're just making a broader point. The
yeah.
It's very. It could just
status quo remains, and people are continue to be distrustful and less happy with Red Hat.
Absolutely, and I think we could just make the same argument. Like Twitter, there are plenty of alternatives now. Blue Sky, we've got an account there. Mastodon, we've got an account there. There's this new thing that's come out this week, Threads, and they're all like they're pretty comparable when you get over there with the features, but like no one, like when I say no one, I just mean like the vast majority of people have not moved. So you kind of get over there and it's just like a few people, right? You know what I mean? It's
the vast majority of people aren't reading 600 posts a day.
Yeah. And then, but it just seems like no matter what, then you're like, well, is this the moment? You're like, okay, now it's throttled down, right? And it's like, is this the moment? But like, you're right. Like no one.
What the settling of the status quo means? There's no growth. There's no like changing of the guard. And so like nobody looking at Twitter is like, you know what? In a year, they're going to be bigger than today.
Yeah, I know. I think that's true. There isn't any there. And I think same thing with Reddit. Like there seemed to be that massive, all the outages or not outages, the going dark kind of thing. But this week it seems I don't use Reddit that much. I'm not a great like example, but it seems like things are back to normal. And there is an alternative to Reddit, which name just escapes me. But like I don't. Even the people that have the alternative are sort of like, we're not really ready for that yet. So I don't know. Is it
get ready?
It's kind of working. I don't know. It's sort of like status quo is kind of winning here.
I mean, I think the main thing is like, not the main thing, but I think an important like lesson learned is that in general, you don't fuck around with the norms of an established community, whether that's like, the APIs you can access for free. It's okay to do this. Like, if there's like things that people have been normally doing in the community for like 10 years and like no matter how small it is, part of it depends on it. Like unless there's a super good reason, like unless your company's about to like fail or something, right? Then really you can't mess around with it because it's going to be like in the least bad scenario, it's just like a huge distraction. And when you could be doing something else, whereas in the baddest bad scenario, you have like the Twitter thing where it's just like, wow, I don't know how you fucked that up, right? Like all you had to do was instead, hey, how about we think about new things to do that would make this better instead of like messing around with the existing stuff and changing it, right? So it's like layering on, which is usually a bad phrase in technology, but like adding on new things and trying to do new things is usually where you find more success because you don't kill the cash cow or the golden goose or whatever or mess with it right now. You could also say in contrast, when you rename your company to Meta and try to start a whole metaverse, that doesn't go well. But the point being is that didn't tank the original goose cow, right? Like you create a whole different area where you can build on the assets that you have, the strategic assets that you have, but you're not like fucking with what works. And so like, especially like, I think, in the open source world and like all that stuff, like if you've got a really successful thing, like don't mess with it unless, for example, if you were Solaris, right? But that's, that there's always exceptions to these things. But like, just be careful when you mess around with the norms of stuff. And it's probably better just to do something new instead of worrying about it.
Well, we shall see. It'll be fun to watch as it goes. And so in this special edition of Software Defined Talk, Matt Ray unfortunately had to go. But Cote, you and I will stay together for the next most important
forever.
Forever. That's right. Where we can dive in and talk. I think we need to do a little DevOps vibe check, Cote. I know this is like in the show notes here for everyone following along, Cote wrote the longest show note ever. I think it's like it's like an entire blog post. I was like,
I only wrote this because I was like, finally, Brandon is going to be so proud that I prepared.
I was. So why don't I'll set it up for you and just say it's like I feel like over the past month, maybe it's just me sort of just picking out, like, even kind of using the Gen Z slang, the vibe check. It's like it does feel like a lot of the DevOps luminaries, the people that we often associate DevOps with, have kind of been, expressing like some discontent about like where we're at. And I think, you heard Matt's interview with Adam Jacob, and he's sort of like, let's just call that his broad view of second wave DevOps. He's got a whole new company, Systems Initiative. Go back, listen to the episode if you want to hear more about that. It's kind of a fresh take on it, but I think he outlines what he was thinking. And then we also had Kelsey, not directly related to DevOps, but I'm going to lump this in anyway. Kelsey Hightower retired from Google, so congratulations to him. So, and he on a recent podcast over at the Changelog, which I'll link, he had some thoughts about DevOps as well. Sort of like, maybe it's not delivering after 10 years. We're not where we want to be. And I just think there's sort of just been this, and I think you've written a lot about this, Cote, like, a lot of discussions around platform engineering. There's been a lot of like just questioning, like, are we making progress? Are we still getting to the point? Are we realizing these benefits that we wanted 10 years ago? And I think there's some questioning of it, which is pretty good. So I don't know. What is your thoughts around so maybe the vibe is a little bit more introspective, and it's also like, I don't know. I just would say this way: DevOps, are we still going the right way? That's what I feel like the vibe is right now. How does that feel to you, Cote? Is that where you're at?
Well, after listening to did I actually listen to it? That's funny. I think I only listened to like a third of it, and then I made myself go back and listen to the rest of it. That the interview that Matt Ray had with Adam, I think, and then some other stuff. Basically there was the idea in there that like we haven't really achieved the goal of the old Spock and Scotty thing, right? Where we've got the developers working with the operations people, or just basically. I mean, it was funny hearing him go over it because he's like, oh, like people can't deploy multiple times a day, and I was thinking like a day. How about like a month, right? Like, like never mind. Like,
and I think this is both what Kelsey and Adam hit on, and I think it's interesting just to use the phrase automation, right? It's sort of like they both kind of key in on most of the stuff today is not nearly as automated as we would have thought 10 years ago. Like it's better. It's definitely better than it was, right? I think so. Let's give the community credit where credit is due. It's not like nothing's been done. Like the whole idea of like it takes 8 months to get a server racked and stat. I mean, there's lots of stuff that is a lot better, right? Now, having said that, I think they both kind of expressed that like, yeah, just forget about the culture thing. It's just like not nearly as much stuff is automated, and it doesn't seem like it's getting automated any faster. We're at some ceiling. I think that's where you were going.
Yeah. And so I tried to gather together as many charts as I could and surveys and stuff about like what the deployment frequencies are. And it'd be responsible if I went and looked at them. But I think the way I summarized it in my mind was like, I don't know, it's like between a month and 6 months, like that, depending on what survey you look at, that people like on average or whatever, that if you ask people in surveys, like it's about monthly that people can deploy, if not longer. Now, my usual footnotes on all of this is like, well, what I really want to do is look at every survey. I want to cut all the people who work at tech companies out of these surveys because who gives a fuck, right? Like that's not the real world. And so like, if you go look at actual, governments, banks,
the sample
companies,
a more representative sample of like say enterprise IT would be a lot smaller than like everybody.
And so I don't have that information. I have no idea, but I would assume it's not as great as what they're doing at like Twitter. Well, that's a bad example. At, like Google or whatever, right?
The scalers, the cloud native, the companies that are like, the biggest internet companies are always going to be doing it. And a great example. They record multiple times a day, right? Very few people are doing that.
Right. And so to fall off the chart in the Excel spreadsheet into Word, into the land of anecdote, right? Like you encounter this as well. And there's a huge selection bias to the people that we're talking with, right? The people that we talk with who are trying to like say, you should be doing things in this new way and using these new products that are cloudy things to make things run better. They're interested because things are not running better. right? So like they're the ones who are not these optimal state of people. Maybe they're off somewhere. But it seems like, over the years, when you talk with people at these regular large enterprises, that they need a lot of help, right? Like they're not quite at this ideal stage that was being dreamed of way back when. And so, whatever, like you look at all these surveys, you kind of have those anecdotes, and it does raise the question of like, I mean, there's two ways of asking the question. One is like, well, like, how come we didn't get to like, we can deploy, it's normal to deploy weekly at least, if not daily. You could ask why that didn't happen. You could also ask like, well, do we need to? Right? Like maybe but maybe the sense we have that people can't deploy that frequently, and yet the world hasn't fallen apart due to that, means we didn't need to in the first place, and it was cool, right? That's another like avenue to go down, is like, well, maybe actually my notion that we should throw tech companies out of the survey base is the opposite. In fact, we should only be caring about what these tech companies do and not worry so much on the other hand. Now, you also brought up a point, I think, that's good, is it's easy to forget how much improvement there's been, how much better things can be, versus way back when things were, it seemed like most every organization shipped on an annual basis, even ones in the tech world that
right. So like one major release and a couple minor
right. And so that's definitely an improvement. But I think the other, there's two more confounding things that I talk about all the time, is like, one, there is like this disconcerting thing of like why platform engineering as a phrase exists versus just like calling it DevOps, right? Like, now it would be a natural evolution of DevOps, especially if you go back and kind of like look at the original like thinking, to say that like everything that platform engineering is talking about is like the direction that DevOps it's kind of like its birthright to evolve into that, right? It'd almost be like if like agile software development like took a nap for several years, and then all of a sudden someone came up and they were like, I've got this crazy new idea called fluid coding. And what we're going to do, and they talked and like, wait, isn't that agile software development? They were like, never heard of it. I don't know what you're talking about. Moving on, right? So like, obviously you would evolve the concepts, and like, in the original DevOps world, the idea of an internal development portal, like that didn't catch on as a big thing. I mean, there was like, I think part of, I always forget, I want to call it clams instead of calms, but like, I think learning is in there, and you could imply from learning that you would have an internal developer portal. And then there's also, you could kind of imply all this stuff out. And then of course you have
backstage now, right? People talk about that, right? That's another
yeah. And people used to talk about information radiators, another concept from the agile world, that you would have dashboards to like list your project status. So, that kind of thing. And IDP is like, would make sense in the DevOps world, but it wasn't there, or it didn't end up there. It ended up in the platform engineering thing. So you look at that, and you're kind of like, how did this happen, right? Like someone didn't have a strong hold on the ball, and someone else grabbed it and started running with it. And then here we are with platform engineering, right? Which is weird. And so like, that's something strange in the DevOps world. And then, I think the other thing, my old hobby horse is like, yeah. And then we got this crazy Kubernetes thing here, where we just spent several years dealing with that.
Right. I think the biggest question there is, and I wish this is the question they asked Kelsey on that podcast, or maybe one day he'll answer it. It's sort of like, I think he's the one that says I think he famously said it's a platform for building platforms. Right. And I think the natural follow-up to that question is like, well, where are the platforms? You know what I mean? And I don't mean that like I know there are many places where their Kubernetes is deployed, but this idea that there is a platform that has sort of sufficiently encapsulated most of the complexity that is contained within it, that really developers can easily access, like that still feels like it hasn't gotten there, right? Like that's the thing that we fundamentally miss. And I know I think just recently posted that he was like redoing Kubernetes the hard way, and it's like so many people I know that have aspired to like, I'm going to do that, I'm going to learn that, and it's like, sometimes I think maybe that's the problem. Like, in college, like you take a compiler's class because you kind of think it's intellectually interesting and maybe it's kind of useful to know what's going on. But then like for most of us, you never write a compiler again. I'm not doing like compilers the hard way, or like, I know some people like to back to our Linux thing. Like some people want to like rebuild the entire Linux operating system because it helps them understand. But most of us like, I just grab a container, you know what I mean? And it's sort of like, there's this level of encapsulation and like hardened platforms where it's like, no, that's what people want to like work on. Right. And, and just telling people like they haven't gotten it right, or they haven't done, like you need to go learn the tool better, or like, you need to change your culture. I mean, another way to say that back is as sort of like the end user is like, no, you need to like give me something better, right? Like I want to fundamentally rethink it. And I think to make this like more something that I think many of us in large corporations can relate to is like content management systems are like this, right? Like you've probably been on the internet and you probably logged into a website that's publicly available, something you own, or Wikipedia, and like you can make a change in like minutes, right? You can like click edit, change it, save it. Sometimes you have to get approval, but it's done. So many enterprise content management systems, like, like the training to use them will be like days, right? You have to do like 5 modules. You have to go to a class. You have to like, there's an incredibly long approval cycle. You have to understand if you're given responsibility. And, a lot of times what happens is intranets and, internal websites, they get like way out of date. And it's like, sometimes I always just think like, has anyone like taken the time, right, to be like, what does it take to keep this thing up to date? Not like, did we deploy the platform correctly? It's like, is the platform like conducive to making edits? Or is it just better to be like, I don't know, the website's broken. Here's the information you need to know. I'll just send you the presentation. Or I posted it internally on some share that's really easy for me to access. And I think, there's like a fundamental kind of, shift that has to go on there. And I think that's sort of like something to always think about. This is like, yes, and Kelsey made this point, like, yes, we should collaborate more, but that's not new, right? That's not a new idea. And just telling people they need to collaborate more, without providing them maybe tools that really make it a lot simpler, or more, levels of encapsulation that are easy to work with, like you're probably missing the point a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think that brings up another thing is like, like we should probably just take a decade to like make what we have work better instead of like just coming up with a brand new thing over and over again. This is very thing that a mature person in the IT industry says, right? Like, why do I have to rewrite something? And I go back and forth all the time on the good versus bad of that. But that is another, it's almost like, it's like a very legacy comp thing to think about. Is like, yeah, we already got all this stuff, and like, really, we just need to configure it well and maybe apply the upgrade, and it'll be fine, right? Instead of using this older stuff, we don't have to like revolutionize the way we think about things, which is sometimes the case and sometimes not. But it does seem like with the desire to come up with like new movements and new technologies and categories, which working at vendors we're very familiar with because that's what we end up wanting to do a lot. Like you kind of just lose sight of like, yeah, or like, let's just make this run better, right? And then that means that you have the whole analyst community and the whole thought leadership community and the whole vendor community, and by that I mean cloud people as well, like trying to come up with like a new revolutionary thing. And I think like one of the things that, I don't know, you can't really talk about DevOps as some like one single thing, but there is very much so the notion has been built up that like it's the culture that matters and the way that people work and the processes. And at some point, I think now, like, it's probably worth thinking about, well, what if you can't change the organization or the culture, right? Which probably yourself, but I've definitely encountered over the past, I don't know, 8, 10, 15 years, like it's kind of been the same, like you've got to like change the culture and the organization like over and over and over again, right? Like you can go all the way back to, I think Extreme Programming was published in 1999. And that has basically the write-up of what most people would say you should aspire to nowadays is we've got one room and we've got like 8 people, and they pair program, and there's a product manager, and there's also like an actual voice of a customer, if not the customer there. And we just release the software every week because we've automated everything and we have automated tests so we can operate that quickly. And that's how we operate. And like, I haven't done this, but it might be fun to go back and find that description in the XP book and like put it up on a slide and say like, this is what we're all going for, right? Like, you know, we're progressing, we're doing it. And then, you know, you click and there's a transition that says published in 1999. And it's kind of like, I mean, never mind even DevOps, like what have we been doing all this time? And again, it goes back to what I was saying is like, well, maybe that goal isn't needed, right? Like maybe, you know, the IRS doesn't need this. Like it would be fine if they deployed every 6 months. I mean, or whatever, right? Like, and so it does like, I think it's worth thinking about, and whatever this whole DevOps platform engineering cloud native community is, like kind of asking like, so let's assume we can't change the way anyone works or an organization structure or a culture. And all we can change are the tools. Like we can introduce new tools, that's fine. But like you can't come up with a new role. It's always going to be the way it is. Then what would we do? Right. And like, you know, a lot of the I don't know. So some of the cults and the priests and the thought people in the DevOps world would just be like, well, obviously you haven't read the DevOps report. That's just going to fail, right? And just like right off the bat, it's you know, you just toss that out. But I think in reality, it's like, yeah, but I mean, we've had since 1999, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to change, right? Like it's always going to be this way. So instead, let's focus on building the tools that make that culture run better instead of dramatically changing things around. And you know, also, I used to use these slides, but if you go back to like 2014 or 2015, as you may remember, Brandon, all of the existing Fortune 500 are about to crash and burn because someone could use JavaScript better than them and was going to have that secret sauce. But like, lo and behold, I don't think so. Right. Yeah. Like, especially in the bigger, giganticer, if that's a word, industries like, you know, the finance world, like finance companies have imploded, but it had nothing to do with software. It was just like it was their own industry and problems that they had. Not that like, you know, there was Robinhood and Revolt and all these things.
JavaScript didn't invent mortgage-backed securities.
Right. And it's not that those big those big banks and insurance companies, it's not that they did nothing, but they in fact proved that their culture was resilient enough to respond and survive to these existential threats that were out there, right? And you know, I mean, for every Circuit City or Blockbuster, there's a JP Morgan Chase, right? That was just like, yeah, let's do this, right? And it's like if you went back and read the at the time, like the annual reports that like Jamie Dimon would put out, like there would be these great paragraphs where he was like, that sounds great. I'm going to bring my 20,000 developers. And like, apparently it worked out. So like, it's almost like if you when I look at and talk with other large organizations, like increasingly because of a lot of the stuff that we're kind of like alluding to here, like I'm starting to think more and more of like, yeah, like what if I just help them work better at what they're doing rather than suggesting they need to like revolutionize the way they think in their organization. You better get HR on board and all this kind of stuff. Cause it seems like there's a lot of improvement that could just be done if you just like, you know, run the current version of your software.
Yeah.
As you were talking
about.
I
think that comes back to like kind of the core thing. I think maybe it is like, this is overly simple, but it's sort of like, just focus in on automation. Like what are the things that are taking a lot of time? Let's just find some of those problems and let's just automate them. And we don't have to call it cultural change. We don't have to do anything. I think, you know, go back to that interview with Kelsey. I think he talks about like, hey, let's just work with the network team to make it easy to automatically issue and assign IP addresses and not have to do it manually. And like, you know, and I think he has a good example. It's like, it's 12 steps now. Could it be 6 steps next month or next quarter? Could it be 4 steps after that? Right. And I think there's that. And I also think it is like, I think it is healthy. And I think, you know, I guess Adam Jacobs sort of first out of the box. It's like thinking about the tools. Where can the tools meet where the people are rather than trying to pull the people towards all of these different tools and things like that. And I even think there's, you know, in that same podcast, one of the hosts was talking about how, you know, he said something that like really resonated with me with something until he's like, I'm just less interested in that part of the stack, like the ops side of it. And I heard if you listen to the DHH interview that our friends Craig and Adam did, you know, DHH talks about like, I love Ruby. He just says it. He's like, I just love it. And it's like, and I think sort of like that emotional response, like people do like their minds and personalities and things they like get connected to technologies, right? Like whether it be Ruby in the Python community and the machine learning, that people really like that. And it's like, you know, if you want to win those communities over, you got to like meet them where they are just as much as you can.
Yeah.
Right? And there may be some limit. So giving people lots of new tools and a new process and telling them to like learn all of this new stuff, you know, maybe not the like you're gonna, and that's maybe the ceiling we're starting to see. It just only gets you so far. So like, you know, so maybe it's Adam's Systems Initiative, maybe it's somebody else listening to this podcast or starting a new company and it's gonna have a different take on it. I hope that's the case. It's like, but maybe there's something that unlocks some other value. And of course we can look to the past. Cote, you know, you did some time at Cloud Foundry and Pivotal. There were some ideas there, and of course, like this is where we make the Heroku joke, right? Everyone's trying to do that. Maybe there will be some attempts, right? Like, you know, we've seen glimpses of it. It's never really taken off, but like I still think there's hope out there, right? Where it's like, oh, like there is a different way that maybe we could automate a lot of more of this in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like you're making me think there's some habit here that as a tech community we're not great at sustaining, right? And that habit being, let's see if I can connect this stuff together. So, you know, I think the last like Kelsey talk I saw was, he was at like, and I've referred this to lots of people, whatever that means, recommended it. He was at like Strange Loop. And you know, he's a great presenter, and he was just like, I heard about this secure software supply chains, and there's this thing called Salsa that helps you do it. And so like I went to read that, and I mean, this is his kind of style of presentation. So he's like, so let's do it, right? Like I've got my code here because I like to do that, and I'm just going to go through and like, if I wanted to start making a secure software supply chain, which we've all heard about, like here's a thing that tells me how to do it, right? And like what's great about that presentation is, other than it being entertaining, is the demystifying a big, weird, you could almost say like marketing concept. Marketing's the wrong word, but it's like it's an abstract concept, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Whereas when he walks through it, it's like, yeah, you go to this web page. There's four, I think I'm going to get it wrong. There's 4 or 5 levels. The first level is you should have a README file and you're done. So I'm going to add a README file. I'm salsa level 1, right? I mean, like it's a little more complicated than that, but like, in contrast to a lot of the stuff that we consume, and this is the connection I want to make, in contrast to the high level, hard to put into practice, like culture stuff that you'll encounter in the DevOps world and other places, like it's basically just saying like, yeah, there's actual stuff you type and do that gets you a secure software supply chain. Now, you know, to illustrate the abstractness and complexity, there can be all sorts of other stuff to secure software supply chains, right? But, you know, then you could also kind of apply that to go back to tech stuff. It's sort of like there was another, I think in the new stack, someone was writing up that like, is it Scott Fulton III? Very consistent in the thirding there, which is always great. I've liked his stuff over the years. I'm not making fun of his name. People can't choose that. Well, I guess they can choose their name, but you know, it's a lot of work. Right. And like, you know, he was kind of doing a roundup of like, it turns out when the Amazon people were saying they went from serverless to a monolith, that isn't really what happened at all, right? And he kind of summed it up. And so, but then he also was alluding to, he interviewed, wherever this was, it was either him or someone else, but, you know, you talk to a lot of people and they're like, oh yeah, this is like, you know, we were trying to do all this stuff forever, like in service-oriented architecture and SOA stuff. And like, I don't know, whatever. And like, I remember SOA stuff. Like you remember me back in this era, like maybe you didn't know I was doing this, Brandon, but I would print out various industry WS star specs because I was like, I was like, there is something in there. And I would put it in 3-ring binders and I would like take it home and just like read through it. Cause I was like, man, this is great. We're like standardizing, as someone noted, like a lot of what SOA turned into was standardizing the data representation in various industries. So I remember reading ones of like, if I'm going to exchange a PO in a supply chain, this is how I'm going to format it, right? And like, but the underlying technology was fine and it was pretty simple. And so like, what would have been cool there would have been to be like, whoa, this is way too complicated. Or maybe it's actually fine. Like, you still need to represent a PO in a supply chain, right? Like all of these things need to exist. But instead, there was just sort of like, well, this is a bunch of bullshit. Let's instead just like send stuff over like HTTP based on this REST research report that or paper that I read. And then you go delve into that and you're like, oh, I don't think this REST guy wants you to do that with his idea. Like he's not into that kind of stuff. So anyways, the point being that like you can also like kind of put up service-oriented architectures and microservice stuff and be like, what's all this microservice stuff we were doing? That seemed to really complexify something that was simple. And, you can imagine another demo where it's like, all right, we're going to implement a microservice. And you can do it technically easy, but then back to the cultural thing, it seems like the whole point of a microservice is to decouple the dependency of one of the components in your system from the other components as much as possible. And then that decoupling often goes back to the culture thing where you have a team that owns that microservice and they don't want to be dependent on other services that you have in your large organization. The classic example, probably in a Sam Newman book somewhere, being like a screenshot of Amazon book page, and you highlight all these little things that are all their own microservices, right? And then like, there's a tell that happens in these technologies, and it's happened in the microservices world and the Kubernetes world, where even comically in retrospect, at the time it seemed wise and smart, but maybe it was a 2015 or 2016 like Martin Fowler thing that was all about microservices, and it was like, you have to be this high to ride the ride. It was a picture that I saw in lots of presentations, and it was like, in retrospect, the thinking is like, if your cool new tool that's going to be so great is really complicated and hard to use, maybe you should go back to the lab, right? Like, because I don't think you're actually like helping, right? Like, instead, you could just like make whatever we're currently doing work better. And it probably does. And, Kubernetes falls in the same thing where like you see every year, and it's getting a little bit better, but you see every year surveys about like complexity and like whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so like that seems like an issue. Like maybe we should not do that or try to it's a little too late now. But anyhow, I think that's the thing, going back to DevOps stuff, is if you look at, like we were talking about a podcast that disputes books, and before we were recording, and one of the common things they do in that podcast is they'll point out that when you read these like airport books or the like the Atomic Habits book, like oftentimes you read it and you're left thinking like, okay, what do I do now? Right? Like what do I actually do to put these practices into place? And that's where a lot of like any sort of like process or culture, like body of thought, like really starts to struggle at that point. Like, how do I, if I have the Westrum thing like tattooed on my coworker's forehead, because it doesn't make sense to tattoo it on your own forehead, but I have it tattooed up there, like, what are the tactics that I do to like move myself to the one that isn't a pejorative column, right? Like, how do I get over there? And more importantly, how do I get my 20,000 developers over there? Like, what's the actual plan for moving there? And like, that stuff often is hard to get a hold of. And instead, I'll have to stop myself mildly ranting here soon. But like, another thing and again, it's not only just one of these things, but one of the things that I've built up over the years that I'm very cautious of is detecting. There's like a marketing anti pattern I think of kind of related to this as well. But I'm always trying to detect if someone's telling me something, some new idea in the tech world that sounds great, if they're spending a lot of time talking about how I forget the philosophy word for this, but how my definitions and categories of things are incorrect, then I'm almost like, I'm not interested in this, right? Like if what I have to do to improve is reimagine the way that I categorize and think of things, right? that I'm not thinking about the state of the machine well, then that means I'm going to have to like tear down the factory and build a new machine, which is just like very annoying. Like, as what would be an example of that? Like, that was my reaction to all that, like, whatever that's Sinwinian chaos complexity theory stuff was. Like, that was my last, like, I don't know if I actually did this, but kind of metaphorically print out a 3-ring binder of stuff and try to understand what this is, because everyone was very obsessed with it and it was going to help you do things. And Wardley maps were kind of like this too, right? Like, it seemed like this magic thought technology. And once you like drew out the map or the territory, or you figured out what category of those 4 complexities you were in, you were done. Like, then you would know what to do. Whereas really, like, maybe you just needed to make your SOA run better, and things would have been fine.
Yeah, I think you kind of get, I mean, just to kind of wrap this whole subject, it's sort of like, I just think going forward, and maybe we can almost like end where we started about the ChatGPT and things like that. Is like, here machine learning and all this stuff. Like, I was joking with Brian Gracely, I think maybe on one of the podcasts, about Amazon, and like they used to do these like 4-hour keynotes about machine learning, about like SageMaker, and you like watch it and like you'd be like, okay, and like I'd sort of like half get it, and then after the keynote I'd be like, I just never think about it again, right? Whereas someone throws out ChatGPT and it's just like, yeah, just start typing questions, just start at prompt, and it's like all this stuff starts happening. And I think that's like a good metaphor to think about. Like, maybe not everything can just be a text box, right? But at the same time, if it's so complicated to have to reconceptualize everything, the organization, the way I think about things and how to do it, it's like, that's also probably an indication that you're off in the wrong part of the world, right? Or you have a huge effort to go change. And I think, and that's maybe, we'll leave it on, whether it's second wave of DevOps, or as Kelsey Hightower and some of the other people retire, like, what's the next thing to kind of replace it? And hopefully, that'll be some of the thinking that goes into either evolving what we have now, or like rethinking the next thing, right? It's like, let's just make this a lot more approachable, and like, let's just keep the benefits. I just go back to that automation, more tangible, and we may see a lot more people get involved than are today. So that's the way I think of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just need like you think about like the other big successful thing in all of this, which is like, containers, which is to say Docker, right? And a huge, I mean, other than the thing itself, like the huge thing that drove its success was just like, you could just do it, right? Like it was easy to understand and explain, and it was very possible versus other gigantic, big important things. And again, like DevOps doesn't really fit into this category, but just like, there was no Docker the hard way. There was just like Docker the way.
Well, it's even better, right? It still exists today. It was just like, oh, like you want to do this thing, and you need like a server that has it already done for you. Like, just download this thing, just go get this image and just run this command. And I use that I'm not every day, but I use that quite a bit. And it's like, that's a really good example, right? Of just sort of like, yeah, that's just like, you can use it for like a million different reasons, all the way from like production development, all the way to like, I'll just keep my Mac clean. I can just finally have a version of Python that I know what's there. I don't have to like mess around with like updating Python on my machine. So that's a good way to think.
I'll just add one more thing. Like, so I've been, I'm always interested in what my old pal Andrew Clay Schaefer is up to, and he's all into the socio-technical systems and things like that. And that's a whole other like exciting trough of all sorts of complex stuff, depending on what you try to read there. But as I've been reading through it, like the thing that I've also realized is, like, I think I've mentioned this before, but there's when you explore the history of social technical systems, like it starts, I don't know, in the 50s or something. And it's basically the study of how humans and technologies are used with each other and interact with each other. I don't know if they would put it this way, but in my mind, to become one system, basically, right? And then you add in like policy and norms and stuff, and you basically, like, if you think about that as a system and all the parts interact and have an equals the wrong word, they have an effect on each other, right? So which is, I think, a lot different than like, tools aren't important, culture is important. It's saying all of these things are important. But what I find interesting there is that, like, or what happened in mine that was interesting there is I was reading all these things that are about like, coal miners and manufacturers. And I kept waiting to be like, yeah, but software and computers are different. And like the way we do stuff is different. Then I realized like, well, yeah. And then also if you think about all the lean manufacturing stuff, like a factory is kind of the worst metaphor for software because it warps the way you think about software to be this repeatable process that's highly automatable instead of like the weird nature that software is. But anyways, it did make me realize that like when you get to the culture and the person side of stuff, like there's not really that anything unique about the way software is done. So in the same way that like you could see that these self-organizing coal miners in somewhere in England or whatever in the 50s, they actually operated better because they could determine you just told them what you wanted done and they would do it with the tools that they had. And that had great results. In the same way that like in lean manufacturing, like whoever is closest to actually making the product or doing the thing that runs the business, they're the best position to make decisions about how to do it versus someone else. And on and on and on, right? Like it's kind of like, oh yeah, what we should do is maybe just discover these universal principles of how things run and maybe do that and also have better tools. Right, instead of having to come up with these like big weird different systems. I don't know, but there's something interesting scurrying around there. People should just get better at doing tools. Speaking of, as one last thing to reference, I think there's an interesting I forget if this is a coda or a footnote, but the Stack Overflow developer survey came out. And if you look at it, and if you, as I'm sure everyone here does, if they follow my alma mater of Red Monk, basically, if you look at the top programming language this year in the Stack Overflow developer survey, and you throw out SQL, not a programming language, you can send email to imnotgonnareadit.com, and Bash and scripting, also not a programming language. And then as much as I hate to admit it, HTML and CSS, where I figure like, I did a lot there, not a programming language. And then if you combine, this is a lot of if, what you're left with is JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, and Java. And I didn't know what TypeScript was, and I went and read it, and it was a superset of JavaScript. So I'm just going to call that JavaScript, whatever.
Yeah, superset. TypeScript's a superset.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think much has changed over the past 15 years. In summary. And so like you have you've got these same like tools sticking there. And I was thinking about, we've got our Spring One conference coming up, and like Spring's been around for 20 years. It seems fine, right? Like, so you have these other technologies that like just keep getting incrementally improved and stabilized and worked on. And meanwhile, all these other programming, TypeScript can be an exception here, but these things that like are like revolutionizing the way things are working, they don't always like bubble up too much, but you've got these good things, which I think, and I think the reason that they're up there is because, again, they keep evolving and things keep being added to them, and they keep getting better and better instead of
just add on there, and like people
ditch.
Want to use them, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like that's the people are drawn to those tools. So I mean, it is what it is at some point, right? Maybe you don't like that, but that's sort of where people want to be.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things that people want to use, Brandon, if people wanted to get stickers, how could they get stickers?
Well, first I want to thank Dennis for emailing in. And what he did was he sent his postal address to stickers@softwaredefinedtalk.com. And I sent him a sticker in the UK. But if you want a sticker, just send your postal address and I will send you one anywhere in the world. Also, we had a bunch of stuff. It's been a couple of weeks since we recorded, so I wanted to throw out a few other things from the crowd, if you will. First, big thanks to Craig and Adam for interviewing DHH. So hopefully people enjoyed that episode. If you want to stay up to date on what they're doing, you should subscribe to Craig Box's newsletter. It's let's see, what is it called here? It's called Let's Get to the News. It's on Substack, so I'll have a link there. They're always up to something interesting, so check them out. Also, wanted to recognize Doug. Doug actually wrote up a blog post. We talked a few weeks ago, Cote, about getting access to data and databases and how hard that can be. So he wrote a blog post called "When You Don't Have a Seat at the Table." So it's good. So if you want to get a shout out, like take something we've talked about and write a blog post. Almost, we love that, right? Like, so everyone should check that one out. Of course, I was recently on the Cloudcast. So if you haven't heard enough of me talking this week, go listen to the Cloudcast. It was a fun episode. It's the mid-year review episode. myself and Brian. I think we had plenty of hot takes. And then finally, just sort of a community media recommendation here. I've already recommended this, but I just wanted to like pile on and just say, so people in the TV channel of the Software Defined Talk Slack, most people said they really enjoyed Silo. I loved Silo, of course, and I've read the books, which I've recommended on here at least multiple times. So if you're looking for something to check out, go to Apple TV and you can watch Silo. So always appreciate all the feedback from the community. It's always fun to hear what everyone's doing. So keep it coming.
Well, there's several conferences coming up on August 8th. You can meet Matt Ray at the Kubernetes Community Day in Australia. I don't know what city it's in, just go somewhere in Australia and you can just kind of walk down the street and get to wherever.
Just the country. All right. We'll have to find that.
Yeah, it's probably somewhere. It might be smack dab in the middle. Who knows? And then as I was alluding to earlier, August 21st to 24th is going to be Spring One and VMware Explore in Las Vegas. And I'm not sure if the CFP for our European one is open still. I think that closed on the 24th, but whatever. And then I'll actually be, speaking of DevOps, I'll be at DevOps Days Des Moines in September 6th to 7th. They invited me to give a keynote there, which will be nice. And then there's, let's see, on October 6th, there'll be KCD Texas 2023. Their CFP is still open. That closes August 30th. And that should be nice. That's the kind of one I would probably go to if I was still back in Texas. And speaking of Texas, on January 29th to February 1st, there'll be that conference in Texas. It's like the fourth or so year, I think, that they're there, if I remember. And, if you're interested in more conferences and events, I don't actually list all of them that I do here, but if you go to my newsletter at newsletter.cote.com, one, you should subscribe to it because there's all sorts of great stuff there. I know because I write it. And therefore it's fantastic. But if you go to newsletter.cote.com and subscribe to it, I try to put every episode, like little things, conferences and stuff like that I'll be up to as well. Maybe not ones I won't be, but you can find more there as well. And with that, Brandon, what do you have to recommend this week?
All right. This week, I think kind of continuing our conversation here about like just what it takes to make changes. I'm just going to recommend you listen to one of these podcast episodes. One is by our people at Odd Lots, and one is by Ezra Klein. And they're both interviews with, I think it's called Jennifer Palika. I don't know if that's exactly how to say it. But anyway, her background is she basically worked in the government and implementing technology in the government. And it's pretty, and she's written a book. So of course she was making the tour of the podcast to sell her book. But I think either one of these episodes, just pick one that you like or the interviewer you like. I thought it was really insightful. Just listening to her talk about what it takes to build software inside the government and the various incentives and the various stakeholders and why it's so difficult, if you will. Like we talk about it all the time on the show. Like why is it take the IRS, for example, $80 billion and how hard it is to do that. And I think it's a pretty eye-opening. So I bet you many of us work in maybe organizations that we think are challenged in some way, but listening to this is a little bit of therapy. Like, wow, like you think you have it hard. Like I was like content management. You think it's hard to update the website at your company. Imagine updating the website at, any of the United States governments. Not simple. So
let alone updating the tax code as represented in business rules spread across mainframes and
it's
web
fascinating.
logic.
I mean, it's fascinating and only an enterprise software person can enjoy. And also too, I'm just going to pile on here. There's so many things in your newsletter this week, Cote, that I really like, but one caught my eye, and it's this Tony Haish. I don't know how to say his name. Anyway, he was the CEO, fairly famous, of Zappos, and kind of sadly passed away, I don't know, a few years ago. But this is a pretty good article, like kind of like taking a fresh look at kind of like the way people evaluated him at the height of his success, and then kind of looking back at what happened. And it's not a happy story, I guess. Let me say that it's not necessarily super uplifting, but I don't know. I think it's important to like go back and look at some of these things that we think about at the time. In fact, we were talking about specifically one of the podcasts. Maybe you should recommend that podcast, Cote, about like looking at airport books. I was even before the show talking about how I liked. I'll just say it on there. I like this show. I like the book Freakonomics, but now I've read all these criticisms and I heard this podcast and I feel bad about liking the book. So, but it's good though. I like when people kind of bring something fresh to it. Like I didn't get it on the first try, and they show it. So, and I think this article does a really good job at maybe kind of, if you will, deconstructing some of the tech mogul myth that we kind of fall into traps with. So I don't know. It's, it's holiday week here in the United States. So I give you plenty of content to listen to by the pool when you're tired of having drinks and swimming. You've got something to chew on. So check all of that stuff out. All the links are in the show notes.
Well, I think so. First of all, for my recommendations, I'll take the bait of the. I've mentioned this podcast, but if we had been recording before the show, I think we would have had I've long said that we should have a podcast where we critique other podcasts. Like we listen to a lot of podcasts, we know them well. We could talk about multiple years of listening to certain podcasts and just do a kind of a critique in the academic sense of we're not being mean about it, but just like what are our thoughts. And I think one that we discussed quite a bit before recording was what Brandon's alluded to, called this podcast If Books Could Kill. And their pedigree comes from I never remember, it's Michael Hobbs is his name. He comes from the You're Wrong About podcast. So it's in a predictable vein of podcastery where they go back and for example, however many decades later they review the Freakonomics book or The World is Flat or the Bobos in Paradise. And there's some what would you call it, shooting fish in a barrel, ducks in a barrel ones, like that pickup artist book. So there's some that are just like you're just there to see them light something on fire. But it's I don't listen to it all the time, but it's good. It's good to see someone structurally take apart something, and to Brandon's point, like review books that previously were thought to be insightful and a big deal. And anyways, it can be fun if you're into that kind of thing. My main recommendation, very small recommendation, but the other day I was thinking, like, I'm always wanting to check out before I do a podcast or whatever. I want to adjust the lighting in my video. And like, I've always got to like open up QuickTime and then you've got to like make a new video. And this seems ridiculous. So I was like, surely there's an application that does this. And lo and behold, there are several, I think, but I found one in Setup, which I subscribe to. You could buy it independently, called Hand Mirror. And all it does is it does a little bit more than this, but it basically, you click on it and it opens up a window that shows you how you look on your webcam. And that's about it. And so like, it's nice because it's a lot faster than opening QuickTime and dismissing that start a new file thing and then going up and doing a new movie and whatever. It's just instantly there. And, you don't have to start Zoom or look at anything, but it's good just to like, and you can do various types of settings so that you can do it differently, but really it just shows you what your webcam is going to look like, which I think I needed that. So Hand Mirror, just search for that, the Hand Mirror app, or you could go to softwaredefinedtalk.com/422 and scroll down to the recommendations and click on the links. Brandon mentioned a lot of them. So you don't, hopefully if you were writing that down and Googling it, you weren't doing that, because you can just go to softwaredefinedtalk.com/422 and find links to things we talked about, a whole bunch of things we didn't talk about. And as always, there's also the Slack channel, which you can go to by going to that same URL, softwaredefinedtalk.com. And we have all sorts of discussions going on in the Slack channel, not only about stuff we talk about here, but just other things. Mostly it's tech stuff, but there's a thriving discussion there. So if you want some of that, go check it out. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Right. Well done, Kote. Right on time. Short hour and 23 minutes. I like it. We had time today, though. It's good. We gave the people something extra. All right, Kote. Well, I'm gonna out you on the stream. Maybe we'll put this in the after show. Okay, Kote. What episode did I recommend Hand Mirror on? Which episode did I give the same exact recommendation? All right. Well, there's 422 episodes.
Let me go.
Which one?
No wonder you look.
The reason I was gonna out you is like it was episode 400. I was like, that wasn't recently, and so what, Kote? You were not on the episode. So I think that's.
Oh man, I barely slipped through credibility there.
You need to go listen to the prompt engineering episode, start to finish, because you didn't.
Let me go look this up.
You didn't do your homework, man. So I'm a huge fan of. In fact, I used it right before we got on. Today I was using Hand Mirror.
We got to call up Dan Benjamin, because I went to the search on our page and put Hand Mirror in quotes and it came up with nothing.
Yeah, never do that. You always
I think that guy's busy.
Google.
But oh, here we go. I just removed the quotes and it worked.
Okay.
So
he's building
user
something
error.
new. I think he's building a whole new.
Yeah, he's there.
like-
I finally figured out there's some podcast hosting, not hosting. It's like a whole workflow for making podcasts easier. You know, slicing stuff up, and I don't know. I only looked at it for 30 seconds.
It'd be interesting to see how it
looks like great stuff.
Yeah,
I think if you have someone with his experience who's done podcasts for so long and presumably listened to them, if you have a user writing software for the scenario they're doing, it's usually pretty awesome.
Yeah, but isn't that Fireside? Isn't that what we're doing? Like, what's like, you know what I mean? It's like,
Well, my impression, it was more like, let's say you're like a broadcaster or like a big to-do company, and you want like a platform that's a lot more than just like, I mean, obviously Fireside's more than this, but like, you know, you want to put the audio in there and slice it up into things and maybe even hook up to workflows for audio stuff. Whereas Fireside is just hosting,
simple,
more or less. And
What-
again,
just
with
off
a
the
bunch
top
of
your
stuff.
head, not a test. What if I said you name the highest volume, most enterprise or most media friendly, you know, like I'm like the New York Times. What podcast host would you say like, oh, they should use this?
Oh, like
the yeah, like what's
thing
the
I was
big
talking about?
competitor to like Fireside? Like, don't use Fireside. You should use this other thing,
Oh, what's a competitor to Fireside?
or just like any of them. Like, you know,
What
even
would I
have
tell? I think you know, well, I mean, Libsyn's really cheap. And don't use Podbean. It's not good. You don't
how
want,
many people work. So I would have said Libsyn. So I looked the other day. Like, how big a company do you think Libsyn is?
I bet it's got to be tiny now because they don't really do anything. Like it's like the optimal like cash reaping, right? Like they built up this brand
That's
and
so
everything, and
awesome.
now they just got to
Yeah,
keep
I
it
looked the
running.
other day. It's only, I think it's like less than 60 people, like maybe
Oh,
less.
so nice.
And the
Yeah.
whole thing, I couldn't find any real revenue, but somebody sent me like 20 million a year. So, which I was like,
That's pretty
I don't know,
amazing.
I would have guessed, like I would have thought they were bigger. Like, I just think, I don't know. Because when I think of someone that like a big podcast, but this was back to, well, there's other stuff like Megaphone that's gotten bought and like Spotify. So I don't know. There may be some like, and then I think when you get to the New York Times, they've like built their own systems. So,
so weird.
Which
Now that would be a funny thing of like, you know, you've heard about people building their own whatever. Get a load of this, right? Like why would you? I don't know, but you know, when you come to like, if you wanted to control your own dynamic ad insertions and like, I don't know, whatever. Like you.
Well, I mean, think about it. New York Times. Basically, they have Serial now. They have the Daily. Do you listen to the Daily? And like
I
that's
used to,
sort of
but
like,
no, not anymore.
that's like a top 5. We gotta like we should like have a segment of like I used to, not anymore. I just think like you should go for like an hour, Cote. You'd be like, I used
That would
to.
be
Like,
great.
it should just be like that should be when you start your next newsletter. That's what it should be called. I used to, but not anymore. And then
I'm gonna have to think of what those are. Yeah, that would be a good segment.
Well, today's
YouTube.
Daily was fantastic in a funny, ironic way. It's like the Daily, I think conservatively, I think the Daily is always in the top 5 of podcasts, at least here in the United States, right? So it's very popular, is all I'm trying to establish. And then they did a whole episode about Mr. Beast, right? It was, right? Mr. Beast is essentially the most popular YouTuber in the world, right? But he's second to the Indian music, which I always forget. But they do it in a way, it's like the interviewer, the person, they do it like they're almost like reporting from like a, I don't know, a very obscure world that no one has heard about, right? Like in a far reaching area. It's like, they're like, because the person who's on, and it was funny, the host this week has a child that her husband works at YouTube and has children kind of our age, or the kids' ages that are watching YouTube, but she comes at it in a way like she has just no idea what it was. And I was like, this is so funny. It's like you have like maybe one of the most popular podcasts in the world talking about the most popular YouTuber in the world. And it's like the two world. I mean, they're both internet native kind of businesses, but it's like there's this wall between. It was just like so weird. It was just freakingly strange to me. I was like, and I love the Daily. I listen to it pretty much every day, and I think it always keeps me up to date. But there was this moment of like, oh, wait a minute, like it feels like they should know a lot more about this than they do. Not just in general, like the people working on this podcast should be thinking a lot about like maybe their podcast should be on YouTube, right? Would be the natural extension. And they should be like really familiar with it. We're like, this just in today on the Daily, there's a website. They host videos. And then let's get to the news. And you're like, it's just so, I just thought the whole thing was super funny. So with that,
no,
it's as part of our review, we're going to review that. We're going to review that podcast reviewing Mr. Beast. I think
I'm telling you, we could
2 hours.
Like people, that's a great thing about like when you go meta, your audience is like all the people who do the thing, and they're the most rabid fans, right? So if we had a podcast critique show, the podcast review, then we would get all these podcaster people review, listening in.
That would be true. We'd have like a super niche. We'd go down to like, just like 5 people listening.
And also we would have enough passion, authority, and complete decoupling from our day jobs that we could just be like glowingly or brutally honest about things and just be like, as long as we don't go into weird, like social things, just be like, I mean, if you listen to their microphone level, this is not good. And just like, like auto ducking is good, but just let's listen to this. Let's play it one more time. You see and then like, subject matter stuff. And then like you were saying, it could be like, I listen to this daily thing. And like, what they really should have done, they spent like 45 seconds explaining what YouTube is. And really at this time, they should have just been in and be like, hey, welcome to the Daily. I think we all know what YouTube is, and you've probably heard about Mr. Beast. First question, right? And be like, you don't got to be all Tyler Cohen and just like be Immedius Rex and everything. But like, no need to talk about what YouTube is. We all know. No big deal. Right?
Well, not only that, but like they even say it on there. Mr. Beast has 100 million subscribers. Like, so you think of all the things you're going to talk about, like bigger than television. It's like, it's almost the most popular thing they maybe have ever talked about on the show. And it was like, I mean, it's like, but it was just funny. It was like, there are 100 million people listening to this across every possible generation. Even if you don't like it, you probably are exposed to it because you either have children, grandchildren, you were a kid. I don't know. It's just so funny. So it's, good. Well, maybe that's another podcast we could do. The meta. I like it. The critique.
The podcast review.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for everyone hanging in on the Twitter stream on the live stream today. Hopefully there wasn't too much chatting. I messed up. I couldn't get my Twitch stream up without like playing more sounds. So hopefully there wasn't anything bad that happened. Can you see the chat, Cote? Was there anything too crazy? Hopefully everybody.
No, I mean, I see it in Restream. It looks fine. There's stickers. Was that a phone call? Goose cow.
All right. Our plan is we'll probably record next week around this time. And then we have a couple interviews coming up. So you maybe hear those as at least I take vacation. And, Coach will probably take a little vacation at some point. So you'll hear a little mix. Hopefully you're enjoying the interviews. Always love to hear about this. And when in this, anyone watching the stream in the Slack, it'd be great to hear like you like them, you don't like them. And more importantly, like who do you think we should be interviewing? If there's somebody out there that you think is good for whatever reason, let us know. So with that, we will talk to you next week. Take care.
Bye.